Dragon gas, is it dead, alive, or sleeping? I am Chris Hussain, and this is Unfiltered Youth and Politics. And today we have decided to do something a little different, which is sitting down with two young people who have a keen eye on many things, energy and even finance. And so I'm very, very pleased to welcome to Unfiltered Mr. Javid Razak, who is an energy analyst, and of course, Miss Janessa Campbell, who I know very well as she is not just an accountant, but she did youth parliament with myself in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. So welcome, guys. Javid, I want to start off with you. Is dragon gas dead, alive, or a little bit sleeping?
So I'd say back to sleep, right? The field is still there, the gas is in the ground, it's not going anywhere. So it could never really be dead, right? It's certainly not totally alive right now since the OFAC licenses have been revoked. So I would say going back to sleep, right? Potential still exists. It's just a matter of how long and if it actually happens. Yeah?
When you speak about the OFAC license, because we have a very specific audience here, can you explain quickly to us the licenses and what this could have meant for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of why was the government so focused on dragon gas?
Okay, so just a little bit of background on Dragon itself, right? So Dragon is a big gas field that's totally within Venezuelan waters, but not very far from our border, right? Just a couple kilometers away from our border. When I say a big gas field, it holds about 3.5 TCF of gas. TCF means trillion cubic feet, right? So it's a large amount of gas. It would have produced for about 25 to 30 years, and it would have produced about 10% of the amount of gas that we're producing now, right? So a sizable amount, and it would have been for a long time. And because it's so close to the border, it would not have cost a lot to build the infrastructure to the Hibiscus platform on the North Coast to get it down to the plants and Atlantic and so on.
So it was our cheapest way and maybe the fastest way for reserves.
Correct. Because you remember, when you're exploring for oil and gas, you don't know what's actually in the ground, right? This is an already discovered field. You know exactly where it is, how much is there. It's pretty easy to exploit, right? Commercially and technically, it's not a problem. Of course, the challenge is the political, the geopolitical, the cross-border negotiations and so on, right? So Shell and NGC together signed a license with the government of Venezuela, basically, to exploit this. The license that got revoked is the OFAC license, which is from the US, which basically allows us to trade with Venezuela and pay them in US currency and handle that deal. Because some people wonder, well, why is the US involved if it's a deal between Trinidad and Venezuela, right? Because we're using US currency and we're using US companies or affiliated companies. So for them not to be sanctioned or anything like that, they need to have that clearance, right? So no company, be it Shell or banks or anybody else, wants to be under sanction. So that OFAC license is necessary.
Why is gas so important? And I'm asking you this because in Trinidad and Tobago, much of our economy is along, or the Minister of Finance would make his projections every year in accordance with oil and gas prices around the world, correct?
Yes, correct. So just about all of our economy is based on oil and gas, right? Maybe roughly, if you want, 2/3 based on gas, maybe 1/3 based on oil right now. The gas...
So, 2/3, so we have diversified a bit, you would say?
2/3 on gas, 1/3 on oil.
Yeah.
Right? And that's basically it, right? There's a tiny amount that comes from what little tourism and agriculture and stuff like that we do. But by far the majority comes from energy sector, right? And taxation based on the energy sector. So gas production has fallen maybe 40% or close to 50% in the last 10 to 15 years, right? And that's natural decline combined with just a lack of exploration and new opportunities, right? One simple answer is the gas is running out, what we have, right? It's not a resource that you could keep replenishing. But there's quite a bit of gas on the Venezuelan side or cross-border, and that's one of the major reasons. That is the major reason that has been sought after by the government so hard, because it's there, we know it's there, it's large amounts, it's accessible, it's technically able, we could exploit it. The problem is, can we get permissions, approvals, the geopolitics again?
The impact of this, what is the impact on our economy?
Okay, so if you want to, I gave this example and something else last week, right? Think about the gas as like a barrel full of water, right? And it has a hole in the bottom, and that water is leaking out all the time. That's the production that goes into the plants and so on, right? You have to have several different hoses filling this barrel at all times coming from different tanks, right? And these tanks are all different places in different parts of your yard. The hoses are different lengths, they have different pressure and all kind of things like that, yeah? So you have to have these hoses filling up this tank, this barrel, and keeping it full. The amount of water coming in has decreased, like I said, by about 40, nearly 50% over the last 15 years. So it's only half full now, right? You need to have new hoses and new tanks coming on just to keep it at half full. If you want to increase that back to the full amount, you need some big new sources of gas. So it's a struggle just to keep it where it is. So there are lots of new projects going on that are just going to try to keep it where it's at. Right?
So outside of Dragon, there are other initiatives and projects maybe coming on stream to assist us with those things.
Yes, so there are several small gas fields that have been discovered over the last few years within our waters that are on the way to being produced. Now, each of these fields produce maybe 5 years or so, maybe a little bit more. Like I said, Dragon was like a 25 to 30 year field, right? So a lot longer. So these little bits are just little bits coming into your barrel just to keep it at half thing. If you want to get it back up to the full amount and then have more US dollars and therefore be able to raise back your credit card limits and all these kind of challenges, right? Then you need some big sources of gas that are going to, a big hose needs to be added to that barrel, right? Dragon was such a hose. And then there were 2 more fields that were possible that could have been brought on that would have been a big impact. All of them have been put to sleep right now.
Now, Janessa, we're speaking about Dragon gas and the impact it could have had on Trinidad and Tobago's economy. Of course, we know, as we have identified here today, that oil and gas are drivers, economic drivers for us. You come from a very specific space as an accountant. When you look at the budget, which is a very difficult thing to unpack, and maybe very difficult here to unpack so quickly, how do you feel, or what do you see or foresee with us or our economy in terms of going into not just this space in Trinidad and Tobago, given that Dragon may not, it's looking like it may not happen, at least right now. How do you foresee our economy surviving, thriving? What do you see for us? Is it that we need to diversify? What are your thoughts on that?
So that diversify word has always been a part of Trini's conversations from, 20, 25 years go back, even before our time. So what the diversification in itself comes with a lot of things. Now, the budget, whoever is in government, the idea is always to foresee ways or create ways in which we could always have a steady revenue coming in at all times. And I feel like Dragon gas is obviously one of the ways in which we wanted to create a source of revenue, a steady stream for the next 25 to 30 years. And given that there's a question mark with it there now, where we don't know if that revenue is going to come in or whatnot, it's going to be a struggle to find new ways then in which we could create revenue for Trinidad and Tobago. And given that oil and gas and the barrel analogy is running out. So when do we start then to move the conversation from diversification into actual implementation of something to change the economy away from 2/3, 1/3 oil and gas? How do we then transition to something else where you could find ample streams of revenue and not be dependent on external parties then making decisions for the economy?
Do you think we have been slow in implementation in this country with successive governments? So this is not directed to any political party. Do you think we have been slow?
Without a doubt, because when you look at the factors, then you look at the unemployment rate, the standard of living in the country, the US reserves. So from that economic perspective, yes, that is true. That is correct then. So anybody else is debating saying, the Trinidad is fine and Trinidad is no, there's a concern and we need to pay attention to it, for sure.
What are some areas you can foresee, or maybe you may, if you were to advise the government, right? Let's put it that way. If you were to advise them, what do you think, as a young person looking on, someone that, public debt is a big thing that we discuss in terms of what we would have to inherit, and we may not even be able to pay back. what would you direct them to in terms of other revenue streams for Trinidad and Tobago?
Ooh, that's a hefty question. Of course, it is a hefty one, because then it's dependent on Trinidad's natural resources and the capabilities of Trinidad itself and what we could find as sources of revenue. Because you can't say, okay, we're going to plant corn or we're going to market something or tourism in a sense. And you have to discover the ways first as to what Trinidad can produce out there and then see the ample sources of revenue. So I feel like tourism is a big one as well, that we get a little revenue from it, but once resources are allocated in an ample way in which you have to create the economy then in a sense, or stimulate it. So I feel like misallocation of resources, if it was channeled in the appropriate manner, then you create the environment in which different sources of revenue could come along, and that could come in many different ways. So we could have transitioned the economy from, let's say, oil and gas. We could go into manufacturing. Agriculture is a big part of our history, and it's something that we mass produce. There's land sitting all over. I'm not versed in the whole agricultural aspect of things, but it's something to look at instead. But again, the conversation is always on, we need to diversify and never how and where and pinpointing exactly what to.
So I'm going to put both of you all on the spot.
Right.
So there's been two ministries put forward by two major political parties. One would have indicated the direction of a ministry of implementation, and one indicated a ministry of AI. How you see this working in tandem with our direction as we continue to develop Trinidad and Tobago? And it's an open question.
I mean, I don't want to knock anybody's ideas, right? But a ministry of AI just sounds like a nice buzzword to use, right? What does that mean? How does it work? We have a department, a ministry of digital transformation, I believe. I don't know what their major successes have been. And I feel just the fact that we don't know what their major successes have been means that something isn't working well, right? They probably have made some progress, but if it's not very clear and obvious to everybody, then it can't be that impactful. A ministry of efficiency, is it? Or implementation?
Implementation.
It was efficiency.
I think implementation and efficiency.
Okay.
Right.
I'll touch on that.
I was mixing it up with the US one, right? I mean, fair enough. If you want to have a special body just to fast track things, right? It makes some sense. But does that mean that we are admitting then that all the existing ministries cannot implement anything? And that we need to do that?
So then, again with finance, I will always do cost benefit, asset liability.
Okay, tell us about that for some of the persons who do not have a finance background.
Oh, okay.
Yeah?
Benefit has to always outweigh the cost. It can't cost more than what you're benefiting from it. That's simple. Asset is something that makes money for you. A liability takes money from you. In the case of the Ministry of Implementation, again, I think it was done or said with the right idea. They acknowledge that there's a problem. In order for that to even be created, you're admitting that there's a problem.
Good.
So I think it was done with good faith. However, if you really put thought into it, you're creating a ministry where there's a minister, ministry vehicles, rental space of office, this, that, these, those. You're going to pay a permanent secretary. So a whole body of staff, a department created to investigate, I guess, the ministries and the efficiency, when as opposed to that, you could have had within each ministry somebody or a body or a department who's responsible for ensuring that the ministry carries out their agenda.
For the permanent secretary.
So I feel like there's some discussion has to be taken place before we even reach to the whole, we want a whole new ministry, So
One last question before we wrap this up. So we know as younger people, right, that our approach to the workplace is very different. Some persons like to describe us, by the way, as lazy, right? I have heard political analysts say that young people lazy. We always on the phone. They don't know what we do on the phone, all kind of stuff, right? But anyways, I think we existed in some times where we had technology as a tool. We have AI that enhances the human intelligence. But of course, we are discussing, and I heard mention at some point over the years of a work from home policy. And I know that some people find it controversial. They may feel work from home, well, it's Trinidadians, we're going to play the fool on me home and thing, right? And so I want to know what are your take on it. Do you think there's the potential for us to increase productivity, or you feel we're not there as a...
Of course.
So you want to
Of course.
take this
Of course. Work from home. I'll even go one step further and say I'm a huge advocate for 4-day work week. Please note, 4-day work week.
The employer.
They know. They know. I've voiced it very publicly.
Looking at this.
I think when the work from home comes into place is that it's tailored to whatever institution it is, right? So certain government ministries, licensed offices, you can't expect that there will be work from home. So it's dependent. But the areas that can be work from home, you're able to measure productivity at all times. You must know if somebody doing their work or they're not doing their work, whether they're in office or they're not in office. I feel like the traditional heads, if they don't see you in office, you're not doing your work. And that's something we need to move away from on a whole. So that's my take on it.
I mean, the obvious answer is yes, right? Where I work right now, we work on a hybrid model. Is a permanent fixture, is a relatively 3 days work in the office, 2 days at home, and there's a lot of flexibility, right? During certain projects, during certain things, there might need to be there every day for periods of time, maybe certain teams. There will always be some roles that need to be in the office. For example, if you're a security guard, you're probably going to need to be in the office for that. There are some things that could be done more remotely. I think the bigger question really, to me, is in whatever role you are, whether you are in a government type role or you're in a private sector role, are you adding value? And is your role adding value? And I think a lot of people forget what the purpose of the jobs are. Right? You're not just employed for because you get a job, but you have to be able to add value that has to do something with bringing in revenue, increasing profitability, decreasing expenditure, providing service to your clients, and so on. If your job doesn't have impacts in one or multiple of those areas, then your job probably does not have a reason to exist. Right? If your job is doing those things, then there are ways to measure those things, whether it's financial measurements or product or customer service measurements and stuff like that. Once you could figure that out, you could put in measurement systems there where you could remotely monitor different things or have reports and so on. So I think we go straight to the work from home and say we want to work from home because we don't want to deal with traffic and all these things. Is your job adding value? And then if it is, tell us how we can measure that value. Yeah?
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us here on Unfiltered. I think we were able to wrap a few things for our audience. And just to borrow some of your terminology, we are in an election period. And so there's a way to measure performance, right? The way to measure performance. And we have a lot of political players in this 2025 election. This has been Unfiltered Youth and Politics.